Right now, there are AI data centers that cost billions of dollars, filled with the most advanced chips in the world, sitting almost idle. And it's not because the technology failed or the money ran out, but because they can't get enough electricity. In some cases, the buildings are finished, the hardware is installed, the systems are ready, but the power they need isn't available where they are, or not fast enough to turn them on. By the end of this video, you'll see why access to power, not intelligence, is becoming the real deciding factor in who wins the AI era. The AI industry isn't growing like normal software anymore. It's growing more like heavy industry. Big tech companies aren't just shipping new models or pushing updates, they're building massive physical infrastructure. The kind of infrastructure that used to be associated with power plants, factories, and utilities. Modern AI data centers are designed to run non-stop. They operate thousands of GPUs at high intensity, often around the clock, with very little downtime. This isn't a side project. It's industrial-scale computing. For most of the last decade, the main bottleneck in AI was hardware. GPUs were hard to get, supply chains were tight, and whoever could secure the most chips had a clear advantage. That problem hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer the biggest one. Something else is taking its place: electricity. In the United States, data centers already use about 4% of all electricity, based on federal estimates. That alone puts them in the same category as some of the largest industrial users in the country. And that share is climbing again after being relatively flat for years. According to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, U.S. data center electricity demand could rise to somewhere between 325 and 580 terawatt hours by 2028. At the high end, that's close to 12% of all electricity used in the country. And this isn't a far-off future. It's well within the planning window utilities and regulators are working with right now. Globally, the picture looks similar. The International Energy Agency expects data center electricity demand to approach 945 terawatt hours by 2030, with AI-focused facilities driving much of that growth. The IEA already considers data centers one of the fastest-growing sources of electricity demand across the entire economy. These numbers matter for a simple reason. Electricity infrastructure doesn't scale the way software does. Money can be raised quickly. Chips can be ordered in bulk. Even large data centers can often be built in a few years. But power generation, transmission lines, and substations take much longer. That gap is turning electricity into the real limiting factor for AI. So the AI industry keeps accelerating, but the grid doesn't. Why electricity's become the limiting factor. Electric power systems are built for slow, steady change. Electricity use usually grows in a predictable way. Utilities plan years ahead, sometimes decades ahead, based on what they expect homes, businesses, and factories to need. And big upgrades aren't quick either. They require permits, environmental reviews, land, and highly specialized equipment. Each step adds time. AI demand doesn't fit that system at all. A single hyperscale AI data center can need hundreds of megawatts of electricity. That's about as much power as a mid-sized city. And unlike many factories or office buildings, AI data centers don't just peak during the workday. They're built to run hard for long stretches of time. From a utilities point of view, that creates several problems at once. First, the demand shows up fast. A data center can go from choosing a site to breaking ground much faster than the grid can be upgraded. In some cases, utilities are asked to deliver huge amounts of guaranteed power on timelines that simply don't match how grid planning works. Second, the demand is concentrated. AI data centers don't spread out evenly. They cluster near cloud regions, fiber networks, and talent hubs. That puts heavy pressure on specific substations and transmission lines instead of spreading the load across a wider area. Third, the demand doesn't let up. Once a large AI cluster is running, it's expected to stay on. It doesn't wind down at night or during slower periods. That constant draw leaves grid operators with less flexibility and increases the need for always available power. Even when utilities want to meet this demand, they often hit physical limits. Key equipment like large transformers, high-voltage switchgear, and substation components take a long time to make. Industry and government reports regularly point to lead times of 2 to 4 years for large transformers, and sometimes even longer. Without that equipment, power that exists elsewhere on the grid can't be delivered to new locations. That's why some AI projects today aren't delayed by chips or funding. They're delayed because the grid hardware they need simply doesn't exist yet. The interconnection backlog. This strain shows up most clearly in something called interconnection queues. Basically, in the United States, any big project that wants to use a lot of electricity, whether it's a power plant or a massive data center, can't just plug into the grid. First, it has to go through a series of checks. These checks look at whether the local grid can actually handle that much power, and if not, what needs to be upgraded. And that process takes time. Right now, according to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, there are about 2,600 gigawatts worth of power projects waiting in these queues. That's more than double the amount of electricity the entire US grid can deliver today. Many of these projects won't ever get built, not because they aren't useful, but because the delays, costs, and uncertainty become too high. AI data centers get stuck in the same system. They aren't just asking to use leftover power. They're asking for large, guaranteed amounts of electricity, often all the time. That usually means new transmission lines or new substations have to be built first. And before any of that can happen, those upgrades have to be planned, approved, paid for, and constructed. And this is where the timing problem shows up. AI companies move fast. Their plans are measured in months, but grid upgrades move slowly. Those timelines are measured in years. When fast-moving AI growth meets slow-moving grid infrastructure, power becomes the bottleneck. Utilities and regulators know this is a problem. Some regions are changing the rules, reordering which projects get priority, or rethinking how large electricity users are approved. Still, rule changes can't fix the physical limits of the grid overnight. Until more transmission lines and substations are built, these queues will continue to slow down how fast AI can scale. Why AI data centers stress the grid differently. Data centers themselves aren't new. We've had them for decades. What's new is the kind of electricity demand that AI creates. In the past, data center power use went up and down throughout the day. Business software was used more during work hours, streaming, social media, and consumer apps peaked in the evening. These daily and seasonal patterns gave grid operators breathing room to balance supply and demand. But AI changes that pattern. Training large AI models means running thousands of powerful chips at very high levels for long stretches of time. Once those models are finished, they don't just shut off. They move into everyday use, where they handle millions of requests around the clock. That adds a second layer of constant demand. So instead of power use rising and falling, it stays high most of the time. Energy experts call this a high-density, high-duty cycle load. In simpler terms, it means a lot of electricity being used continuously in one place with very few breaks. That difference matters because power grids are built around variety. They assume that some users will need power in the morning, others at night, and that demand will shift throughout the day. When one large facility pulls a steady amount of electricity all the time, those assumptions stop working. Infrastructure that was fine for fluctuating demand can quickly become inadequate for constant demand. Substations fill up faster, transmission lines hit their limits sooner, and backup capacity gets used more often. This doesn't mean countries are running out of electricity overall. The problem is where the electricity is available. A state or region might produce plenty of power in total, but the specific area where AI data centers are being built may not have enough transmission lines or substation capacity to deliver it. That local mismatch is what causes delays and drives up costs. And that leads directly to the next constraint shaping the AI era: the location problem. At a national or global level, the power situation can look manageable. Many countries still have room to generate more electricity. Renewable energy is expanding, natural gas plants already exist, nuclear power is being reconsidered in several regions. On paper, it can look like there's enough electricity overall to support continued AI growth. But AI data centers don't run on national totals. They run on very specific power connections in very specific locations. And that's where the location problem starts. AI data centers tend to cluster in the same kinds of places. They're built near large pools of technical talent. They depend on dense fiber networks and fast, low-latency internet connections. They also grow around existing cloud regions and establish tech hubs, where suppliers, partners, and customers are already nearby. Power doesn't follow that same pattern. Electricity has three separate layers: Power has to be generated, then moved across transmission lines, and finally delivered through local substations. A region can produce plenty of electricity and still be unable to deliver it to a specific area where data centers want to build. In practice, having power available doesn't always mean it can reach the place it's needed. That mismatch is already shaping how AI develops. Some regions have plenty of power but don't attract large AI data centers because they lack strong fiber networks, a skilled workforce, or proximity to existing cloud infrastructure. At the same time, major AI hubs are hitting hard limits because their local grids weren't designed for many massive data centers arriving at once. Northern Virginia is a clear example. It became one of the world's largest data center markets because of its connectivity and closeness to major cloud regions. Now it's facing growing pressure on transmission lines and substations as new AI projects compete for limited power. In Europe, similar challenges have shown up around Dublin, Frankfurt, and parts of the Netherlands, where grid operators have warned that data center growth is colliding with local capacity limits. The obvious response is often, just build the data center somewhere else. In reality, that's rarely simple. Moving away from existing hubs increases delays, weakens network efficiency, complicates backup planning, and creates new regulatory hurdles. It can also reduce the benefits of being close to other data centers and cloud services. Because of that, companies often choose to wait for power instead of relocating. That's why geography has returned as a key factor in AI. What this means for reliability and cost. As AI data centers keep scaling, the impact doesn't stop at the tech industry. It spills into the power system that everyone relies on. Earlier, we talked about how electric grids depend on balance. They work best when electricity use rises and falls across different users at different times. That natural variation gives operators room to manage stress. Here's the problem. Large AI data centers don't follow those patterns. Instead of fading into the background, they pull a steady amount of power around the clock. And when several hyperscale facilities do this in the same region, that constant demand starts to stack. The grid becomes less flexible, and there's less room for error. That's where reliability concerns really come into focus. During heat waves, cold snaps, or equipment failures, grid operators normally have options. They can shift load, rely on spare capacity, or wait for demand to drop. But when a big chunk of demand is always on, those options shrink. Keeping the system stable becomes harder, and the risk of outages goes up. That's why regulators are paying close attention. In multiple regions, grid operators have warned that rapid data center growth could increase outage risk if infrastructure upgrades don't keep pace. In response, some utilities are tightening the rules for new connections. They're asking for on-site backup power, participation in demand response programs, or commitments to reduce usage during emergencies. All of that changes the economics. It also raises a simple but uncomfortable question. Who pays for the upgrades? Transmission lines, substations, and transformers aren't cheap. Regulators have to decide whether data center operators should cover most of the cost or whether it should be shared with households and small businesses. If data centers pay everything, electricity becomes a bigger and less predictable expense. If the costs are spread more broadly, public pushback becomes likely. You can already see this tension playing out in utility hearings across the United States and Europe. Local communities are asking why their power bills should help support global tech companies. Environmental groups are questioning land use, water consumption, and emissions tied to new power projects. At the same time, utilities point out that data centers bring jobs, tax revenue, and long-term investment. There's no easy answer here. But one thing is clear. AI progress isn't free. Someone pays for the electricity. The winners and losers of the power-constrained AI era. As electricity becomes harder to secure, it's starting to shape who can actually compete in AI, and the gap is growing. Some companies are simply ahead of the curve. They locked in long-term power contracts years ago before AI demand exploded. Others built strong relationships early with utilities and grid operators. Today, that shows up as clearer timelines and fewer surprises. Companies that place data centers in areas with spare grid capacity also find it easier to scale. That early planning creates momentum. Control matters too. Companies that own more of their power setup face fewer obstacles when they want to expand. That might mean on-site generation. It could be a private substation. In some cases, it's even a dedicated transmission connection. These setups reduce reliance on crowded public grids and shorten the gap between planning and deployment. They're expensive, but in a power-constrained world, they offer something rare: predictability. The same pattern shows up at the regional level. Places that planned ahead by upgrading transmission, simplifying permits, and aligning energy policy with data center growth are in a much stronger position. They can absorb new AI projects without triggering reliability concerns or political backlash. That makes them more attractive to long-term investment. Others face a tougher reality. Late movers deal with longer wait times. Costs are higher, timelines are uncertain. In power-constrained regions, projects can stall even when demand and funding are strong. Smaller AI companies feel this most. They usually don't have the leverage to negotiate special power terms or wait through years of delays. Over time, that gap widens. Power access stops being a background detail. It becomes a competitive advantage. Companies that secure electricity quickly can train models sooner. They can deploy faster. And they can keep improving while others are still stuck waiting. Realistic fixes. There's no single fix for the power limits facing AI data centers. But there are practical ways to ease the pressure, especially if they're used early and consistently. The first lever is flexibility. For a long time, data centers were treated as always-on machines. They pulled power non-stop, no matter what was happening on the grid. That made sense in the past. But AI data centers don't have to work that way all the time. Some AI work is flexible. Training large models or running big batch jobs doesn't always have to happen immediately. Those tasks can be scheduled more carefully, unlike real-time services that need instant responses. That flexibility makes load shifting possible. In simple terms, it means moving non-urgent computing away from peak hours. That could be during heat waves, cold snaps, or busy evening periods when the grid is already stretched. Even small shifts can make a big difference. They reduce stress on the system and lower the need for expensive peak infrastructure. Utilities already do this with factories and other large users through demand response programs. Data centers can join too. They agree to briefly reduce power use during emergencies or high-stress moments. In return, they may get lower rates or priority access the rest of the time. Demand response doesn't remove demand, but it flattens the spikes that cause the most trouble. And efficiency matters here as well. Recent industry work, including analysis from Cisco, points out that AI systems need to scale smarter and not just bigger. Power-efficient networking, better data movement, and spreading workloads across multiple sites all help reduce wasted energy. These improvements don't solve the power problem on their own, but they make existing capacity go further. The second lever is speed. Grid upgrades don't have to be slow, but they often are. That's because many projects are treated as one-off designs. Standardization helps. Using pre-approved substation designs, modular equipment, and repeatable connection processes can shave years off timelines and reduce uncertainty. Permitting is another slowdown. When reviews and approvals are spread across multiple agencies, projects stall. Streamlining those steps, without cutting safety corners, can move transmission and substation upgrades forward faster. Some regions are already experimenting with this because long delays now carry real economic and reliability risks. The third lever is planning. One of the biggest mistakes is treating power as something to figure out later. Co-locating generation near data centers, whether that's renewables, natural gas, or other steady sources, reduces reliance on crowded transmission paths. It won't fix everything, but it can dramatically shorten the time it takes to bring power online. Long-term planning matters too. Utilities that account for data center growth early can build ahead of demand instead of scrambling after constraints appear. Power shapes the AI future. For most of the AI boom, progress has been described as a race for intelligence. That story made sense for a while, but it's starting to fall apart. AI's next phase isn't being held back by algorithms alone. It's being held back by physical things like substations, transformers, or transmission lines. And whether large amounts of electricity can be delivered to very specific places, fast enough. That shift changes everything. Access to power starts to matter as much as access to talent or capital. Companies that lock in electricity early, build flexibility into how they operate, and work closely with utilities gain momentum that's hard to catch up to later. The same goes for regions. Places that invest in grid capacity and long-term planning attract new AI development. Places that don't begin to fall behind, even if they have money and skilled workers. This isn't a failure of AI technology. It's a reminder of something more basic. Digital systems still depend on physical infrastructure. AI doesn't float in the cloud. It runs in buildings. It sits on land, and it's powered by wires. As the industry keeps scaling, success will depend less on who announces the flashiest model and more on who can actually deploy systems reliably, affordably, and at scale. Power access, connection speed, and infrastructure readiness will increasingly decide what's possible and what isn't. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and want more deep dives into the future of AI, make sure you hit subscribe and stay tuned. There is a lot more coming.